Good morning and welcome to Daily Coffee with Carter and Keri on Unsafe Space. Today's Tuesday, October 15th, and we thank you for joining us for our silly show.
It is a silly show sometimes. Also, thank you to, we had the first person ever to tip us through Subscribestar. We had an anonymous tipper. The email I got was an anonymous, it said anonymous, but actually they gave me this person's email address. So I wrote them, and if they want to be named, I will name them on the next show. But thank you.
I think I know who this tipper is.
Huh?
I think I know who this tipper is.
It's not the person you think.
Oh, okay.
No.
Well, thank you, tipper.
So, yeah. Anyway, thank you, anonymous tipper. So you can support the show by going to Subscribestar, look for Unsafe Space. You can just do a one-time tip, or you can sign up. And if you sign up, you get your name in the show credits, which is every girl's dream.
So the tipper wasn't my dad. I'm joking.
No, the tipper was not your dad.
I'm kidding.
Keri, it's something that we've talked about in the past more, but I think it's worth bringing up again because there's been a couple things in the news in the last few days that reminded me of this. I think it's worth reminding people how biased and corrupt and untrustworthy the legacy media is. And the two things, one of the things what's happened recently is Project Veritas is now releasing undercover videos about CNN and the inherent bias in CNN. I don't know if you saw any of those. Have you seen this?
Well, yeah, they've been doing this for a while. I mean, I saw one of the recent ones, but I haven't seen all of them. Well, but they did the one a while back with, what's his face? Van Jones calling the Russia thing a nothing burger.
Yeah, they've done a lot of CNN stuff, but the most recent thing is they've got a guy named Corey Porch, I think is how you say his name. He worked at CNN and agreed to wear a camera into CNN and recorded phone calls. There's a 9 a.m. phone call with Jeff Zucker, who is the CEO of CNN. And he recorded the kind of 9 a.m., I don't know if it's a stand-up call or whatever, but the 9 a.m. check-in call that they have every day with Zucker. And it became very clear from this that and by the way, he also recorded lots of conversations with other people at CNN. And it became very clear from this that Zucker had, first of all, a personal kind of vendetta against Trump that seems to be common knowledge at CNN in the newsroom. Zucker was calling Fox News conspiracy nonsense.
I saw that, yeah. Which is kind of funny considering what they do. I mean, They do conspiracy nonsense. Propaganda.
Yeah, right. It is funny because he was also pushing impeachment, and he was telling the people in the newsroom, like, focus on impeachment, like nothing else. Impeachment. That's what we've got to do. And there was people expressing frustration at this that just wanted to kind of. There are people at CNN who just want to be journalists, but they're kind of being told, nope, impeachment's the thing. And there's at one point he says, this is a quote from Zucker, there's a lot of people at CNN that are friendly with Lindsey Graham. Time to knock that off.
I saw that. The Golden Graham. Huh? He doesn't like the Golden Graham.
He does not like Lindsey Graham. And, some of this stuff we know, they talked about Don Lemon being obviously leftist and biased, but the thing that was pointed out, and this whistleblower, as they call him, Gary Porch, he claims this isn't really politically motivated. His frustration is, he said, look, it's fine if they want to be leftist, but they need to tell people, because CNN spends a lot of time talking about how objective they are. And they're anything but objective. They are intentionally, in his view, he thinks they're left biased and anti-Trump biased. They are anti-Trump biased. I don't like to describe them as, I think there's a better way to view the media than left biased, but I get what he's saying. Keri, we've talked about this before. I know that we talk about the media being biased. I view this as bias toward the deep state, not leftist bias. And there's a subtle I don't know if it's subtle, but there's a distinction there. And whenever you have a bureaucracy, have you ever seen Parks and Rec, Keri?
Yes.
Okay, a lot of people have seen Parks and Rec. In bureaucracy, in a government bureaucracy, there are a few Leslie Nopes. There's definitely a lot of Jerrys, maybe some Aprils. There's no such thing as Ron Swanson in government bureaucracy. They don't exist. There are no people that are members of government bureaucracies that are trying to actively shrink the role and size of the state. That doesn't happen, right? It's funny in the show, and part of what makes it funny is that he's kind of there hating his job and trying to destroy the very department that he's in, right? That doesn't exist in real life. So what happens naturally in a government bureaucracy, this is why people say like governments naturally move left. What they do is they naturally expand. And the reason they naturally expand, and what we call the deep state, it's not a conspiracy theory among a bunch of government workers trying to do something necessarily or having some, overt agenda. It's just that there's either stagnation or growth. There's never reduction because there are no Ron Swansons in government. That doesn't happen. There are only people like Leslie Knope who want to do more and more and more and expand the role of the government. So you end up with this, or people who just kind of, either don't like their job and are doing it half-assed or trying to be competent at it, whatever. But there's no one trying to reduce the scope. There's no incentive to reduce the scope.
Well, it's like that Upton Sinclair quote that we've mentioned before. It's hard to get a man to understand something that his salary depends on him not understanding.
Right.
That's also the reason why nonprofits and activist movements in general, that's why they don't stop once they've achieved their goal, because there's so many people in the movement who make money off of it. Like we've talked about this before, and professional SJWs who not only does their ideology tell them to look at everything through this lens of racism and sexism is everywhere, right? But they also make a living writing that. And so Sean King doesn't have an incentive to stop seeing racism everywhere. That's why he gets paid.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's what happened to a lot of the feminists, right? The feminist movement was very important for a long time. And you had your second wave feminism, and a lot of the things that they were fighting for, they basically achieved. And they needed something to do. They had this apparatus. They needed something to fight against. So they kept going, and that has evolved into trans activism. And now the feminists who haven't gone along with that are vilified and kicked out. I mean, they're called TERFs, and the establishment feminism has moved on, right? They've moved on beyond the original goals because they've got a life of their own, and bureaucracies have lives of their own. And so when you look at legacy media, it's not that they're left leaning. I mean, they are, but that's not the essence of it. They just support the deep state. They just support that bureaucracy. They're not technically part of it, but they're not, when you think of traditional left, I know now leftists are kind of authoritarians, which is weird, but 20 years ago, when you think of the left, right, you don't think of that. You think of back in the days when the ACLU supported free speech and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But the media has never really been left. I thought, one of the things that I thought of as being on the left was anti-war. But the media is never.
The media is pro-war, yeah.
Right, they're never anti-war.
You're making a great point, because I noticed that during the I was a big, I protested the Iraq War. I was out several times a week at protests in Los Angeles, and I was very opposed to George W. Bush, and I was opposed to all the lies that went into it. Because I think also I was at that point in life that I was at an age where I trusted the media, and then I'm like, wait, why are they selling us this war? And they know it's a lie. And why is CNN involved? And I couldn't really wrap my head around it at the time, but it makes sense now because it's not necessarily, they line up with the left more than they do the right, especially the current authoritarian left.
Yes.
But what they line up with are the interests of the deep state. I completely agree.
Yeah.
It's that apparatus that exists that's not going to go away. The people who we're not electing, but all of those little roles that are filled by sort of like permanent government employees and hires, people who are higher up, who see, people can't really wrap their head around the deep state because they're like, well, but Trump is in charge. It's like, Trump is really in charge. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. If we stick you on top of a rhinoceros, who's in charge? I mean, you're technically riding it, I guess. But yeah, it's not that simple. And the deep state has a hell of a lot of power. And interestingly enough, everyone knows this. They only argue against it when they don't like your political leanings, right? There's been countless Hollywood movies about the deep state getting away with things, and all these sorts of
and there are
theories that the left likes even.
Well, and the left is, look at Dennis Kucinich. Dennis Kucinich is an actual progressive. I wouldn't call him SJW. He's a real progressive. He's a real, on the left, there are still real progressives who haven't been, sort of, what's the word, co-opted by this belief system. And he's one of them. And he talks about the deep state all the time. That's why sometimes you see weird things like, wait a minute, Dennis Kucinich and Steve Bannon overlap on this one point, it's like, yeah.
Right. In fact, there are some radical leftists on Twitter that I actually really like following, specifically because I disagree with them about a whole bunch of stuff, but they are spot on with they monitor the military industrial complex, they monitor the deep state, and they don't pull punches when it's a Democrat doing something. They're anti-deep state. But I think the reason you see the media mostly line up with the left is by and large more proactively about preservation and enlargement of that deep state apparatus, right? It's mostly the Republicans sometimes talk about limiting spending and sometimes talk about rolling back programs or doing away with agencies. They don't often do it, but they sometimes talk about it. The left doesn't. The left always talks about expanding. And if you're pro deep state, that helps. And the obvious thing with war also, just to be, because someone will bring this up if we don't, war sells news, right? I mean, war is exciting. War is the ultimate clickbait. So, but I think there's a link that's deeper than just love of war. I think it is a love of the deep state. And if you think about a large media organization, first of all, any large company likes the large bureaucracies because they're barriers to entry for newcomers. Any kind of regulation or and even large bureaucracies are barriers to entry, because if let's say you're CNN or you're ABC or whatever, you've got teams full of contacts with all these people in the deep state, because this is where you get a lot of information. You get anonymous sources, you get to understand what's going on, what the government's up to. All your sources and all your information is often coming from bureaucrats in the deep state, not necessarily elected officials. And so this is kind of your they're your news that you're using.
Yeah, they know it's the people who butter the biscuit.
Yeah, right. And so if they go away, it becomes harder to report on. And actually, there's less to report on. You have to do a little bit more work. So it's much easier to have a Rolodex of people who work for various agencies that can just fill you in on information. So, and obviously there's ideological. They all went, most of the people in the legacy media went through humanities departments of universities. And even though probably everything is now infected with radical Marxism at universities, including physics to some extent, certainly the humanities have been more infected for longer. So they've been building this army of leftists. So anyway, so that's what's been going on with CNN. The other thing that made me think about this and not trusting the mainstream news is, Keri, did you see the ABC video?
I did.
Okay, so I'm gonna play. I'll put this video up separately, actually, because it's like a minute long. It's pretty short, but I'll play this video. I'll give some context. So ABC, as we've talked about, the mainstream media, including ABC, they are not anti-war, so they're very upset that Trump is pulling troops out of Syria, or has pulled troops out of Syria. And they're trying to present this in the most dramatic light possible, sensationalize this. Oh my God, look what the Turks are doing, blah, blah, blah. Never mind that we've been funding and arming ISIS in that region and everyone kind of knows it and whatever. So anyway, they wanted to show some video of the dramatic excitement that was going on, and they were caught using a video from the Knob Creek shooting range and pretending in Kentucky, and pretending that this was footage of Turkey attacking Syria. And this is this Knob Creek video was taken in April of 2017. So let me just play this for people who haven't seen it.
This video, obtained by ABC News, appears to show the fury of the Turkish attack on the border town of Tel Aviv.
A border town bombarded by Turkey's military. This video right here appearing to show Turkey's military bombing Kurd civilians in a Syrian border town. The Kurds, who fought alongside the U.S. against ISIS. Now, horrific reports of atrocities committed by Turkish-backed fighters on those very allies.
This is just, it doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. But I mean, they treat the news like entertainment, right? So some kid, I can totally see how someone who works there would be like, well, let's sweeten this. Let's go and get some footage. And the footage we have doesn't tell the story we want. So, but the story we have, because they believe the story is true. The story we have is true. Let's just get something to, you know, sensationalize it a bit, sweeten it a bit, you know, give it, when I say sweeten, it's almost like well, like in comedy, sweetening is when you put in extra laughs, right? Well, this is like putting in extra explosions.
Excitement. Here's some.
Yeah. They're like, it's true. Let's just sweeten it up.
Right. And if you'll notice, though, so ABC has actually acknowledged this. They've apologized. Oops, we made a mistake. What they haven't done is explain at all how this happened. And if you'll notice, I don't think this could be like a, oops, I grabbed the wrong file.
No, of course not. No.
Because, yeah, but if you look, they did a couple things. One, they zoomed in. Zooming in on the video crops out the crowd. So you can't actually see the rain. You just see the zoomed in part. And they made it low res, which makes it look like it's like a satellite feed live from the fields of, Syria. But in fact, they had to actively do that. They had to actively take a high-res video from YouTube from this event in Kentucky, zoom in, crop, and down-res. That's pretty intentional. That's not an oops. That's like, that's like a guy who's cheating that's like, oops, I tripped and cheated. Like, well, I fell onto this woman on the sidewalk and we managed to have sex. Like, it's not a mistake. That's an intentional deception. It's not a mistake. It's not like they used the wrong video by mistake. It's an intentional deception. And they haven't explained it. They haven't said, we're sorry, we tried, yes, we fired the guy who was trying to do this because blah, 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 or whatever. They didn't, nothing. Just an arrogant little, oops, sorry about that. Right? And they're only sorry because they got caught. And if it weren't for the internet, they probably wouldn't have got caught.
Yeah.
Right? They wouldn't have got, in the past, we wouldn't know. We wouldn't know where that video was from.
Well, yeah, I'm sure this has happened lots of times. And just think about all the times over the past 2 years. And I say 2 years because that's when I started paying attention to stuff. Really. When Obama was president, I was like, oh, as a typical, I think I was a pretty typical leftist or whatever at the time. I didn't really pay attention to much that he was doing because I was like, oh, the person I like is in control. I can go to sleep now. I'd been hypercritical during the Bush years, and then during the Obama years, I just put my go to sleep now.
That's one of the things that bothered me the most about the leftist supporters of Obama, the liberal supporters of Obama. You were the same people chaining yourselves to Market Street to protest the Iraq War. And he didn't do anything he said with respect to withdrawing troops. He had drone Tuesdays.
I know.
Silence from you guys.
I know
Silence.
this now. I know this now, but I didn't know this back then.
Well, in fairness,
think about the echo chambers you're in for a second. You are really not getting this news.
Right. I was gonna say, in fairness, CNN probably wasn't talking about it much, right?
No, not like Jeff Zucker. It's not like Jeff Zucker was waking up going, "We're going to get Obama today." You know.
Right. I want you to talk about his drone strikes. Nothing but his drone strikes.
Right. Like, imagine if they treated him the way they treat Trump. It would be totally different. But even then, I think there's such a collectivist delusion that happens when you're probably on both sides, whatever, I don't know. I wasn't on the right. Maybe the same thing happens there when your guys running things, but on the left, when your guys running things, even if the media had been reporting about it nonstop, which they weren't, you still have, there's this amazing ability just to like ignore things when it's your guy doing it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although you're reminding me that something else that I wanted to mention when we talked about the deep state, Keri, I think part of I won't say this is intentional, but part of the distraction here is getting people to think in terms of left and right. It's not about left and right. It's not about the Republicans versus the Democrats.
Oh, I totally agree. That's a distraction, but that most people do think in terms of left and right. So I find that I have to speak in terms of left and right because that's the way people.
I'm not criticizing you for speaking it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, when you start to see this stuff, when you realize that there is this apparatus and there's a large pro-bureaucracy, pro-state growth apparatus supported by the legacy media, you realize that the two sides really, the spectrum really is more of that or less of that. That's the spectrum. It's more of that big state, deep state stuff or less of that big state, deep state stuff. And on that spectrum, you've got people on one end who want, basically none of it, like the, anarcho-capitalists or libertarians who want very little. And then the other one, you've got, authoritarian left and the authoritarian right, which is much smaller than the authoritarian left. But they're both at the other end of, we want a giant police state with a huge apparatus that's policing the world. And that's the conversation no one wants you to have, because the entire legacy media and both parties want expansion of the state. They don't want you looking at expansion of the state as an issue and figuring out what direction you want the state to go, because a lot of people want it to go smaller. And when you pose the question that way, a lot of people go, well, yeah, it is kind of unruly and out of control. Like, kids can't have lemonade stands without licenses from officials. We've gone too far. We're policing the entire world, but they don't want you having that conversation. So that's all I really wanted to mention about the legacy media. Although, Keri, there is one thing kind of related. You and I talked about Joker the other day. Did you see that Dave Cullen YouTube video about Joker?
No.
He made a really interesting point.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he made an interesting point, and it's related to this. He said, keep in mind, so a lot of people on the right, I know we talked about the Joker movie, and we basically pointed out that left was outraged by it, but it was a well-done movie, and I stand by that. It was a well-done movie. I don't know that we encouraged people to watch it and said it was awesome, but it was a well-done movie. However, Dave Cullen points out, look, ultimately, that movie is part of this mainstream establishment. Like, it's owned by a media conglomerate. It is part of this. It's part of this establishment, and we could be getting played, right? We could be, because it's not rocketing market science, or sorry, it's not marketing rocket science to intentionally gin up opposition to your thing and controversy in order to get it viewed, in order for people to find it, in order to get it to be more popular and in the zeitgeist. And so it's entirely possible that the outrage over the Joker movie is part of intentional marketing, right? Where it's part of like, okay, we're going to get outraged by it. People are going to pay attention to it. The right's going to then want to go see it just because we're outraged by it, which people do react that way. I react that way. If there's a lot of leftist outrage about something, I'll be like, well, I wouldn't go see it, but I will. And that was actually what I did with the Joker movie. I wouldn't have gone to see it. I don't care about that stuff, but I did because there was so much leftist outrage. And his point is, look, maybe we're really getting played, because at the end of the day, although the Joker movie is well done artistically, it's not really a positive pro-Western civilization message. It's not a. This isn't a great message about individualism and personal responsibility and smaller government and autonomy. This is really about the breakdown of society. It's kind of a nihilistic movie. It's not really a positive movie. It is artistically well done, but they got us to go watch it when we might not have.
No, I don't. Okay, whatever.
Well, you don't have to agree with it.
No, I don't agree with it. But
he makes is that is good is when you only blindly oppose whatever when the left complains and you immediately just say, I'm going to go like it because they're upset about it, you could fall into traps like that.
Oh, well, I agree, but we didn't do that. And I didn't go watch that movie because the left blind, it wasn't it's like saying, like Jussie Smollett when that happened. To blindly oppose would have been to say, he's lying immediately, which we didn't do. It's like, I don't blindly go into there.
Well, but I watched you might not have. I would not have watched the Joker movie. It wasn't for the controversy. Maybe you would have, but I did. I wouldn't have watched the Joker movie if it wasn't for controversy.
Did you watch the Heath Ledger one?
I don't remember. Maybe. But yeah, I think I did a long time ago. But I wouldn't have gone to the theaters. Not now. I might have watched it when it came out on Netflix or whatever. But I think there is a point to be made here, which is knee-jerking is also not a great strategy. It is important to step back and think about, like, okay, because it very well could have been a lot of the controversy. I don't think it's far-fetched that the controversy was ginned up intentionally to increase viewership. That's a tactic that's used. So just be aware. I do think the left outrage was probably authentic, but it's easy to get those people outraged at stuff. So that's not very hard. Anyway, that's all. I think that's it for mainstream media, legacy media conversation today. Keri, do you have anything else to add?
Nope, I think we're good.
All righty. Well, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share. Please go to unsafespace.com. You can sign up for a newsletter. You can support the show there. And Keri's going to remind you what day book club is and when book club is and what book it is that we're watching next or reading next.
So I just want to remind everybody to join. We're going to be doing book club next month, Sunday, November 17th. So if you'd like to join us, we're going to be reading The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff.
I think that's right.
Lukianoff. And you can get a copy through our website and support us through an affiliate link. And we really appreciate it. Hope to see you next month.